Hello Lagos, good evening and welcome to Countdown 2019 with Rotimi Sankore. This is 99.3 Nigeria Info. I am Sandra Ezekwesili.
And Awogo Obo.
You can follow the show on Twitter at Countdown 2019. You can follow Nigeria Info FM as well. You can follow me as Ezekwesili, and you can follow Awogo Obo, spelled exactly the way I said it. We have Ayobe on the show today.
Hi.
Hi. Why are you laughing? This is
because of the way that you said exactly the way I spelled exactly the way I said it.
Yeah, there's like And so we start off with the idea segment of Countdown 2019 and then move over to having conversations with Kadaria Ahmed, who's also on the show with us. Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we'll start with Ayobe and then move over to having conversations about the ethics that journalists should imbibe, especially during the elections. Over to you, Ms. Ayobe.
Oh, thanks very much, Sandra. Actually, I should say that ethics is also part of the IDEA's acronym. So we may also be picking Kadaria's brain on that matter as well. But I should say that yesterday I was at the Murtala Muhammad Foundation's annual lecture, and the theme was towards towards more credible, free, inclusive elections in Nigeria. And at the meeting, the keynote address was given by Professor Chidi Odinkalu. And he noted that he sort of traced the trajectory of our presidential elections, of which we've had 6, because he counted the 1979 presidential election, the 1983 one, and then the botched June 12th presidential election, and then the ones we've had in this our Fourth Republic. So we're really, we've been on a trajectory. And I also looked at it and reflected how in this Fourth Republic we kind of marked time for the first 3 elections up to 2007. But that since then, that was the election we had with under Professor Maurice Iwu, that the winner himself felt had been so poorly conducted that we needed to have electoral reform. And so you had the Uwe's panel on electoral reform. And since then, the general consensus is that our elections have been getting better. And that was the theme of Professor Odinkalu's paper. I commented on it from being, as I said, rather longer in the tooth than him. I've actually participated in many of these things. And indeed, I was the most junior of the council who was involved in the famous 12 2/3 case. So if you look at the report of that case, you will see my name as the last lawyer.
Maybe you should give a little bit of background to that.
The 12 2/3 case was the transition to civil rule of 1979. And we had an election where the presidential election was going to be the last election. So you'd had state house of, you'd had all the legislative elections, and we had 19 states. And we had the same constitutional requirement that you must get 25% of the vote in at least 2/3 of the states of Nigeria. But of course, 19 is a number that is not divisible by 3.
Yeah.
And so every other thing that the electoral management body had done had treated 2/3 as 13. But when the results of the first legislative elections came out, it was clear that the leading party was not going to be able to score 2/3 in 13 states. And it wouldn't have been terrible. It would have just meant that we had to go to a runoff election. And of course, in a runoff election amongst the 2 highest, then there's a possibility that everybody can, as they would say, gang up. But then one of the leading lawyers in the leading party at that time came out with what was known as the winning formula, which was not that you had to have 2/3 of the vote in 13 states, but you had to have 2/3 of the vote in 19 in 12 2/3 of the states.
That's a lot of math.
And in Kano State, as it
So much
happened,
math, but I actually remembered I was 11. But that two-thirds argument was so interesting.
no, but the point is
math.
that it was, you had a situation where the mathematics of it was that in Kano State, they would, the leading party would get 25% of the vote in 2/3 of the local government areas, but not in the whole state. And when that was declared the winning formula, and there was also a situation where we had previously had our Chief Justice had been Sir Darnley Alexander, who was actually from the West Indies, and he was eased out of his position, and we now had a Nigerian Chief Justice of Nigeria again. Justice Fatai Williams. And so the case was set to go to court, but it wasn't about whether the votes were being counted properly or not. And it was about how do you interpret 12 2/3. And in the end, the Supreme Court said that 2/3 of 19 is 12 2/3. And that was how Shehu Shagari became president. Of course, by the next election, it was moonslide time, so there was no, there's nothing like calculating.
Moonslide.
You know, but I think that it's you see, because I mentioned the fact that it wasn't about counting the votes, because since then we have had a real struggle about counting the votes and collating them. Now, things were slightly better. I mean, I was also involved, I was working, I should say, with GOK Ajay. That's how I became involved in some of these cases, not because of my great legal prowess in election cases.
So modest.
But by 1983, we had a lot of election petitions, and most of them resulted in overturning the verdict that had been declared. So it's always important to understand that an election is not just about what happens on the day, it's not just about counting and so on. But I kind of digressed, because what I wanted to say was that...
A very important digression.
What I wanted to say was that we had Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the former president of Liberia. She is leading the ECOWAS mission. I must say, this is the first time I've seen her for a long time without her famous head tie. And then we had the joint NDI-IRI delegation. Now, I used to work for the National Democratic Institute, and we're always sort of doing things with the International Republican Institute, so they are kind of like my people. And as it happened, President Festus Mogae, the former president of Botswana, had actually been heading a pre-election assessment mission. When I started, I took time out from legal practice to work with NDI, and that was in 2006. And they sort of, what they do is that they look at what recommendations can we make for this election that's coming up in a year's time, so that it will be as good as it possibly can. But he was now heading, one of the heads, and then you had also the vice president of the Gambia. And we also had the former president of Latvia. And she, you know, the timetable or the agenda of the lecture was that we gave our lectures, and then you had some goodwill messages. And she wasn't actually on the list, but she said she wants to speak. And when she, you know, she came to the podium, she said she just wants to say how much she admires Nigerians, that we've managed to hold our country together despite all our differences of ethnicity, of religion, of culture, because we had two of our royal fathers there, the Sultan of Sokoto and the Emir of Kano. And so I think everybody who was listening felt that, yes, actually, we're sometimes a bit too hard on ourselves. We who are inside, we only see the problems that we have, but we should recognize that outside, people may criticize us, but there are some who admire us. And we should do more, I think, perhaps, to try and live up to the things that people admire about us, even though in this time of elections, particularly with the added factor of social media, it's we may be concentrating more on what divides, but that was a salutary reminder that, and as Professor Odinkalu said, Nigeria will still be here on Sunday, and Nigerians will go to work on Monday, and these are some of the things too that I think we.
But there's an important question which we need to ask, which is, in the context of the idea segment, what would we consider a breach of the integrity of the process, of the actual voting process?
Oh, there are so many ways in which it could be breached. Starting off with the simple matter of punctuality, because the polls are supposed to open at 8 o'clock and to close at 2. Now, if the election officers are not ready at that time, then already you have some delays. And I would say that in my time when I was on the Police Service Commission and we monitored the conduct of the police and the security agencies during the elections, it was noticeable that the police were always on time. They were always at the polling station in good time. The election officers were still collecting materials and they could be late. The security agents...
Is there provisions for an extension in that sort of situation?
Well, if the...
Where you start late.
If you start late...
automatic that you then extend?
I'm not sure that it's automatic, but I think that they do extend. But what they have said is that if their card reader machines are not working, then they will have to have the poll at that polling station the next day. And I think also that because it's an important point that you raise, because of the instruction that as long as you're on the line at 2 o'clock, then you're allowed to vote.
And when you think about places like I think it's Anambra that is having to have card reader problems.
Yes, but INEC is insisting that it has replaced the card readers. And I think we should be aware that these card readers, I think, are manufactured here, and so there's a capacity to do that replacing. Obviously, if the accreditation is not done on the basis of the card reader, but instead INEC now starts reverting to manual, which INEC has said is not going to do. But so if it were to do that, that again would be it would attack it would call the integrity of the vote into question.
But if they had no way out and there are no card readers,
then they're supposed to wait till the next day. Although I know that there has been some litigation to challenge that, but that had been INEC's position, and as far as I know, the courts have not.
And that's actually something that happened in 2015. They continued the next day when the card readers didn't work on day one.
Yeah. So I think that's an important part. But I guess that so for us who are the ordinary voters, we go, we vote, and we are free to stick around and see the count. Now, so obviously if you come in the morning, the ballot box is shown to everybody and it is shown to be empty. The ballot boxes are semi-translucent so that you can see whether something is put inside or not. Those are the sorts of things that have to be checked to begin with, to make sure that the forms that they're going to fill at the end have not been, they have all the necessary forms. And things like that, which are important for being able to trace to do a number trail. And I think also it's important to stress the role that political party agents play in the integrity of the poll, because when the votes are counted, in the first place, if there are some ballot box papers that have, strayed, the mark has strayed into another section, the polling agent will show it, and people will sort of...
Do they want to challenge this?
Yes, they want to challenge it. And of course, if you want to challenge the one that doesn't favor you, you may find that the principle that you lay down could work against you the next time. So those are things. But also the point is that they are there, they observe the count, and then they have to fill the form. signifying the result.
That
And
all the parties.
everybody who is there as a party agent is supposed to be able to have their own signed by all the parties and also signed by the security agents as well as the polling officers.
So I have two quick questions. If as a party agent you're in a polling unit where you are concerned that material breaches have happened, are you by law allowed to refuse to sign results?
Yes,
as
you
a
don't
sign
have
of
to.
protest?
You're not obliged to sign. You're not obliged to sign. But
by appending your signature, you're essentially
agree that
saying
this is
you
what
agree.
was counted at my. But then you're counting what is count. You're attesting to what is counted. There may have been other incidents which have occurred which are of concern to you, and that's why I've said before the election observers. They don't go to say what went wrong. They go to say this is the time that the poll opened. Okay, if it opened at 9 o'clock, that's what they will write. They will say these are the number of security officers that we saw. If they didn't see any, that's what they will write. I mean, sometimes the police are, moving between one or two, and in some areas where you have a lot of polling units, and so on. So that and if they see people who were not accredited. Voting.
Okay, so that's
all of
another
those
thing
things.
because we have a material difference between the last elections and this one.
Yeah.
Last elections, you first do accreditation,
And then you
then
come back.
and vote. On this particular
happening.
occasion, you're going to be accredited and then you go ahead
Yeah.
and you vote. In your view, does this do anything at all to
Well,
the process? And its
I think
integrity,
that,
or- because I've heard the opposition complain.
I should say that I played a material, as far as I'm concerned, I played a material role in the system of separate accreditation and coming back to vote. But that was in I happened to be at the Chinua Achebe colloquium with Professor Jega, who'd just been appointed to head INEC. And they were planning to do the same system as we had in 2007. And I said, well, that would be okay if your voters register was not a work of fiction. But where your voters register is a work of fiction, then this is really the only way that you have of trying to force some integrity back about the numbers. Because in the situation where there are so many false names there, if you make everybody be there, if you've registered in 12 places and then you have to be somewhere in that hour, you will not be able to cover those 12 places. So that's the time when that was important. But, and we also used it in 2015. Now INEC is saying it's more confident about its voters register, that there cannot be double registration, that if you come with the same digital or biometric data, your thumbs, your fingers, and you try to register more, then it will show, and you will be rejected. So we have to see. I think really the reason why INEC wants to do this is, according to them, that people come for accreditation, they don't come back to vote, especially if the accreditation
Takes
is
long.
yeah. And we are one of the few countries where that happens. I mean, having observed elections in Kenya and other places, you go and you vote. But, so it's a sign of maturing in our democracy. But we are going to see whether it works or not.
There is an important question, just taking us back to the issue of political party agents signing.
Yeah.
So in a situation where you have dozens of
Yeah.
parties,
It can get quite...
which means dozens of party agents have to sign, what would be the threshold for saying that enough people signed?
Well, I don't know. You see, I mean, the last time I was involved in litigation on this in 1983, when we only had 6 political parties by law. It was limited to 6. They had to meet very strict criteria, and then they could be registered. And we only had 6 parties, so we could, every agent could sign. And it was very important because I was doing election petitions in Plateau State, and you could have the and it's important from the point of view for we lawyers, because when a document is created in exactly the same way, then people talk about copies and originals, but in law we don't really talk about that. We talk about primary evidence and secondary evidence, and each signed results sheet like that is primary evidence of every other one. So when you come and say these are the results that were declared, then that's what, unless somebody now comes and says, no, my own sheet is different.
It's different.
And
But say you have 72
Two.
candidates, and you have party agents for
then
all of
you better
them.
get ready.
So you need the same number of copies signed by all of them.
Yeah. It could be a lengthy process.
And
lengthy and
if
tiring
if
process.
only 20 or 30 sign,
Well, I mean, if the others don't, then it will be for them to show what it is that they're going to show to their political parties. Because if you're in a party that doesn't sign, and then you later want to challenge the result,
then you have nothing to present.
well, you have what you say is the result, but it may not be signed by everybody else.
The thing is, though, I suspect you're going to find that deploying agents at every polling unit is expensive.
Oh, very.
It
So
is.
many,
Under the current
many
system,
parties
will
are
not have.
actually
They will
not
not.
going to have
They won't.
agents at the
So
polling unit.
what then happens if only a few parties are able to deploy?
No, but then those are the parties that are going to be able to attest
You
to or
can't blame
challenge.
INEC for you not
No,
being
no,
able
no.
to
It's
deploy,
not a question of
you know.
blaming INEC. It's just that from the legal point of view.
No, it doesn't make any difference. As I said, any that is signed in the same way is primary evidence of the rest. So that's, I mean, I'm going way ahead to assume that that there may be wards or whatever it was. And then when you do the arithmetic of these 13, the number you get is not the number that was declared. Now, again, it's important because we just said we're not accusing anybody of forgery. We're not accusing anybody of crime, because this was the difference between Anambra State, which had the same problem, and Ondo State. In Anambra State, they said that they committed forgery, that they were criminals and so on. And when you allege crime, you have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. When we just say, excuse me, just do the maths. And that...
But
All right.
I should actually let me
run
cut
out of
off my
time.
idea session.
We've-
Just please
we've
remember
run
to
out
check
of-
us out on Ideas Radio, www.ideasradio.ng, and also follow us on Twitter, which is @IdeasRadioNG. Officially, I'm bowing out of the Ideas section. I'm not sure I've really talked about integrity and so on, but I think that what I would just say in closing is that it's important for voters to assume integrity and go out and vote, rather than assuming lack of integrity and stay home. Because as I always say, the vote that doesn't get counted is the one that you don't count. That's the one that you can be sure will not be counted. Everything else, we try and do our best. But the one that you don't cast, it's not going to get counted.
okay.